Gameplan.com, where football makes sense. I'm Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook. Bring you our 2013 college football preview show. And today we're breaking down the Mid-American Conference. We're going to take a look at the MAC and we're going to break it down top to bottom. But first, let's start on the recruiting trail to see how well these teams recruited this past offseason.
I believe the Toledo Rockets had the best recruiting class in the MAC this season. You look at some of these guys, and they have a wide recruiting base. You see guys from Orlando, Florida, and Curtis Riley, a quarterback. You also see Robert Zimmerman, a defensive tackle, JUCO transfer, 6'3", 320 pounds. They're expecting him to step in right away and start and help bolster that run defense. But a guy that, in my opinion, is the best recruit out of this class is quarterback Michael Julian, 6'5", 190 pounds. They're looking at him as their quarterback of the future, and I think they got a great one in Julian coming out of South Carolina. Here's a guy that can make every throw possible, put him in a weight room, get him up to about 210, and they got themselves a stud at the QB position. Akron needs playmakers, and when you look at Anthony Lauro, 5'9", 190 pounds, he can play wide receiver. He can also play in the backfield, so I think this is a guy that can definitely help jumpstart that offense. Bowling Green just does a great job of stockpiling running backs, and Fred Coppett is next in line. I love the way this guy runs. He can also help out as a returner. He may see time very early as a freshman. The linebacker position was decimated by graduation, so that's why Nicholas Isaac, 6'1", 230 pounds, has a great chance to see time very early as a freshman for the Ball State Cardinals. I like what the Bulls are building out there in Western New York. You look at cornerback Andrews Dadebo, another talented cornerback going to an already talented defense, not afraid to come up and lay a hit on a receiver. Big fan of the run after the catch skills provided by Wesley Thomas, 6 feet, 195 pounds, going to Central Michigan, where he as well can see time very early in that passing offense. When we look at Eastern Michigan, getting their quarterback of the future as well, and Brogan Robach, he's so talented. He may even start this year as a true freshman. He's going to push for the starting job, but they definitely got a quarterback that they can hang their hats on. Big fan of the mobility of Nathan Strock, the quarterback going to the Kent State Golden Flashes. He actually fits perfectly what they want to do offensively from that position. I'm a big fan of offensive linemen that can move. And when you look at Randy Heitman, who was also a basketball player at the high school level, 6'6", 290 pounds, definitely fits the build and could easily crack the 2 deep for the Redhawks this season. Running back Argyros Turner gives the Huskies exactly what they want coming out of the backfield: explosiveness and the potential for the big play. Frank Solich does a sound job with that Ohio Bobcats program, and they had a very good defensive end in Cameron McLeod, 6'3", 285, can play inside at defensive tackle in certain passing situations. Defensive lineman Kyrie Bailey, 6'3", 250 pounds, going to Western Michigan, another guy that has the versatility to line up as an outside edge rusher in the 3-4 front, but this is a guy that will see time as your traditional 4-3 defensive end. And UMass signed themselves a very good running back prospect in Lorenzo Woodley, 6 feet, 210 pounds. He may even start this year for the Minutemen. They sorely need help in the backfield. Jordan Lynch alone makes this the best group of quarterbacks in the MAC, and he should get some serious Heisman Trophy consideration this season. And they're also well prepared once he graduates, as sophomore Matt McIntosh is also a pretty good football player. Let's chew on these numbers real quick. Both Dree Archer and Trayon Durham rushed for a combined 2,700 yards and 30 touchdowns last season. Durham averaged a healthy 4.8 yards a carry, while Archer averaged over 9 yards a carry. So you can see why I've given a nod to Kent State for having the best group of running backs in the conference. Or in the MAC, in my opinion, all 3 of their top receivers returned, led by Willie Snead, the outstanding wide receiver who was first-team All-MAC. But look for tight end Zane Fakes to make an even bigger impact this season, especially in the red zone. You can also make a case for the Toledo Rockets, but it's tough to go against the Huskies' offensive line that paved the way for the video game-like offensive numbers that they put up last season. And all 5 starters returned up front, led by left tackle Tyler Lewis. I believe it's a tie between Bowling Green and Kent State having the best defensive line. Despite losing All-American Chris Jones, the Falcons are still very good up front with nose tackle Ted Owlett and defensive ends Charlie Walker and Brian Thomas. And the Golden Flashes have arguably the best defensive lineman in the conference in the 3-time first-team All-MAC performer Roosevelt Nix. Both squads, in my opinion, are very good against run, as they held their opponents last year to under 4 yards a carry. Here's a tie for the best linebacking core as well between Buffalo and Bowling Green. Outside linebacker Khalil Mack is a legit NFL prospect, and Lee Skinner and Jake Stockman are big guys that can also run, and that's over 230 tackles for the Bulls last season. And as for the Falcons, you look at Gabe Martin and Paul Swan. They make it tough to move the football against Bowling Green, no matter whether it's on the ground or through the air. I believe the Ohio Bobcats have the best secondary in the MAC, getting Travis Carey back and Jamil Shaw at 100%, along with the solid depth at the cornerback position. You have to like what they bring to the table on the edges. And strong safety Josh Kristoff is also a fine defensive back. This is a very good secondary overall for Ohio. The Toledo Rockets have the best special teams in the MAC. You look at a solid, respectable kicking game with Jeremiah Detmer, who went 6 out of 7 between 40 and 49 yards, and punter Vinny Penza, 58 punts last season, 21 of which landed inside the 20. But what makes this group special is the return specialist himself, Bernard Reedy, who's an outstanding receiver. But last year, he averaged 27 yards of kickoff return and brought 3 back to the house, and had 11 yards of punt return, and also scored a touchdown returning one. Offensive MVP, in my opinion, will be Keith Winning out of Ball State. When you have all 3 of your top receivers returning, you have a very good running game with Jawan Edwards in the backfield, solid offensive line. There's no reason why you can't be successful in that offense. Jimmy Ward out of Northern Illinois, the safety, gets my vote for the defensive MVP. This is a guy that has the skill set to make it happen on the back end. True freshman running back Lorenzo Woodley gets my vote for the Rookie of the Year. I think he will start for UMass, and they need help in the backfield. And this is a guy that's going to get the opportunities, he's going to get the touches, and has the talent to get the yards. This is a great year for the MAC as far as pro prospects are concerned. There's 14 guys that have a legit first to third round grade that I've given them in my football game plan preseason draft rankings, but I'm gonna give you 3 right now. Dree Archer out of Kent State, outstanding playmaker. This is the guy who can score from anywhere on the football field. You also look at Khalil Mack, his outside pass rushing ability makes him a legit prospect, especially for 3-4 defenses. And when you look at a team that runs a 3-4, you look at Roosevelt Nix transitioning from a defensive tackle where he's undersized at 5'11", 245, to an outside edge rusher where he can dominate. This is a guy that's one of the best defensive prospects in the draft. I believe the Akron Zips have a very tough schedule, the toughest in the MAC this year. You look at their out-of-conference schedule, they have to travel to Central Florida and Michigan, and they also have to play Louisiana, very tough Raging Cajun football team. When you look at the schedule in conference, not only do they have to travel to Bowling Green, but they also have to play Ohio immediately following that, and they draw the toughest teams from the Western Division, Northern Illinois, Ball State, and Toledo. This is a very tough schedule for the Zips. 7th in the East Division, and the reason for optimism, help is on the way with a very good recruiting class this season for UMass, led by running back Lorenzo Woodley, and you're going to see a lot of talented freshmen crack the 2 deep this season. And tight end Rob Blanchflower and left tackle Anthony Deemer are very solid offensive pieces as well. Now the cause for concern would be if sophomore quarterback Mike Wegzen doesn't make the necessary progressions this year, and it could be problems for the passing game, which is already lacking the playmakers on the flanks. Now defensively, they gave up 40 points a game. Granted, they played a ton of young guys last season, so with that trial by fire type of experience, the hope is that they'll play much better in 2013. The schedule makes it tough, but you'll definitely see a more talented UMass team this season. Next up, we have the Akron Zips, and the reason for optimism, continuity is always a good thing in football, and the Zips will be in their second full season with head coach Terry Bowden at the helm. And there are some pieces here for the Zips to work with this season. You look at running back Jawan Chisholm, nose guard Cody Grice, who was an outstanding freshman prospect last season, and cornerback Malachi Freeman. The cause for concern, they struggled mightily on defense last year, and they're lighter up front than most teams, and they yielded 4.9 yards a carry by the opponent. Now offensively, bringing in a new quarterback in Kyle Pohl, who shows promise, but will they drastically improve enough to be respectable? Right now, I have the Zips improved over last season, but still on the back end of the East Division. Coming in 5th place, I have the Miami of Ohio Redhawks, and the reason for optimism, quarterback Austin Boucher, in my opinion, won't be that much of a drop-off from Zach Dicer, and the Redhawks will still be able to throw the football all over the field. Look for junior wide receiver DeJuan Scott to go over the 1,000-yard mark this season. And on defense, getting defensive tackle Austin Brown back is huge, as he'll help that run defense that gave up 5.5 yards a carry last year. There's excellent players back deep at cornerback with Bryson Burris. And a cause for concern, wide receiver Nick Hartwell transferring deals a huge blow to the passing game. And also the Redhawks have to find balance offensively, and that has nothing to do with the running back or the offensive line. The coaches have to call a well-balanced game. They have a tough road schedule as well at Marshall, at Kentucky, at Illinois, Ohio, Kent, and Ball State. And they also host Cincinnati, who's a very tough team. Let's hope the youth from last year turns into very good experience for the Redhawks this season. Next up are the Buffalo Bulls, and the reason for optimism: defense wins games, and the Bulls have two game changers on that side of the football. You look at defensive end Kobe Way, a senior, and outside linebacker Khalil Mack, who had 8 sacks and 13 TFLs last season. And you also look at linebacker Lee Skinner and cornerback Najee Johnson are very good players as well. Offensively, they'll be able to run the football with Brandon Oliver and Devin Campbell. Wide receiver Alex Newts went over 1,000 yards last season at 15 yards a catch. That's very impressive. And they have an athletic offensive line that can move. Now, the cause for concern: as solid as the Bulls are as a team, consistent quarterback play is mostly what's holding this team back. Quarterback Joe Lasada started the last 4 games in which they won 3 of those contests, and he did a respectable job, so there's hope for him at that position. But the passing game as a whole must avoid becoming one-dimensional, so they need other wide receiving targets to step up and become effective. But with the defense and a running game like the Bulls have, I do see them finishing 4th in the East Division. Coming in 3rd place, I have the Kent State Golden Flashes, and the reason for optimism: offensively, the Golden Flashes will be just fine, even with breaking in a new quarterback. Let's be honest, this is still a run-based offense that returns over 2,700 yards of rushing from 2 players in All-American Dree Archer and Trayon Durham. Defensively, the talented defensive lineman Roosevelt Nix returns to continue to wreak havoc on opposing offenses, and strong safety Luke Wallet leads a very solid group of defensive backs. Now, the cause for concern: the Golden Flashes lost a lot of production, especially in the front 7. The linebacking core took the biggest hit, and the offensive line also lost some key components. The hope is that guys that got experience last year will be ready to step up and be starters. You can't ignore the fact that losing Darrell Hazel could have a slight effect as well on this football team, and they have a very challenging first month of the season, but they still have enough talent on the ground and defensively to be in the thick of the MAC East Division race. Next up, I have the Bowling Green Falcons, and the reason for optimism: the Falcons are a very solid football team. Defensively is where they were strongest last year, and it'll be where they're excellent again this season. They returned 9 starters from a defense that was ranked top 15 nationally. Linebacker Gabe Martin should also push for All-American honors, and I'm a big fan of their receiving core led by Chris Gallion. And even if running back Anthon Samuel doesn't return, you look at Andre Givens, he's a pretty good player that's going to be able to run behind a very good offensive line. Now, the cause for concern: quarterback Matt Shields, in my opinion, has to play better. The accuracy has to improve, as well as the decision-making. Defensively, losing All-American defensive tackle Chris Jones does hurt a bit, as does Dwayne Woods. However, I still think they'll be able to overcome those losses, but Week 1 versus Tulsa is a huge test and should tell you all you need to know about Bowling Green moving forward. Still have slight questions at the quarterback position, so therefore the passing game will suffer, which is why I have them finishing 2nd in the MAC East. In 1st place in the East Division, I have the Ohio Bobcats, and the reason for optimism: a healthy Bobcat team is a dangerous Bobcat team, and Ohio could point to a rash of injuries that derailed a promising start last year. Now, they get back 2 of their best cornerbacks in Travis Carey and Jamil Shaw, and quarterback Tyler Tettleton is 100%, and he should be effective this year, and they already boast a potent running attack led by the outstanding tailback Bo Blankenship, who rushed for over 1,600 yards last season, and they were very solid on defense, especially in the red zone. Now, the cause for concern: the interior of the offensive line loses NFL draft pick Eric Herman and 2 other starters, which are vital to the running game. And defensively, there are some depth concerns in the front 7, and they can't afford the same rash of injuries this time around. And when you look at the schedule, outside of a Week 1 test versus Louisville, which should be a very good football game, they have a very favorable slate, and I think the Bobcats will win the East Division. Now let's move over to the West Division and start with the Eastern Michigan Eagles. And the reason for optimism: there's some offensive potential this season for Eastern Michigan. And when you look in the backfield, Bronson Hill has the skills to go over 1,000 yards. And as they continue to expand the passing game, there's some decent options at wide receiver with Donald Scott and Dustin Creel. There's good size up front on defense with a solid free safety in Donald Coleman. Now, the cause for concern: you look at a defense last year that had real problems getting to the quarterback, only 7 sacks as a team. They also have to get better in stopping a run. And as respectable of a job junior quarterback Tyler Benz did last season, he isn't fully entrenched as the starter, with 4-star prospect Brogan Robach looking to breathe down his neck and probably will see some time this season. So they have a lot of questions right now. They're still in that rebuilding phase, so I think they'll finish 6th in the West Division. Next up, we have the Western Michigan Broncos, and the reason for optimism, new head coach PJ Fleck inherits a team that has a good skill base to get off to a good start. Senior quarterback Tyler Van Bergen should put up some big-time numbers as he has some big-time talent to throw the football to in 2012 MAC Freshman of the Year, Jamie Wilson, and wide receiver Josh Schaefer. The Broncos also utilize depth in the backfield to keep the running game on pace. Defensively, they have a chance to be very solid with 7 starters returning, especially in the back 7. And I'm a big fan of their linebacking core with Desmond Bozeman and Kyle Lark. Now, the cause for concern, the Broncos lack the depth on both sides of the ball. So if there's going to be a lot of pressure on the younger guys to step up and provide quality depth. You also have to be concerned about the offensive line with only 1 returning starter up front. They do have the benefit of the unknown with the new head coach, so they could pull off a shocker or 2 in the conference. So look for Western Michigan to flirt with 6 wins this season. 4th place, I had the Central Michigan Chippewas, and a reason for optimism. Instantly, what jumps out at you about the Chippewas is talented running back Zerline Tipton, 19 rushing touchdowns last year and almost 1,500 yards. And despite losing the #1 overall pick in Eric Fisher, this is still a pretty good offensive line. Solid wide receiver as well, and all-MAC performer Titus Davis. Defensively, they are tough at linebacker with Shamari Benton and Justin Srirachi combining for over 250 tackles. Now, the cause for concern, which defense is the real Chippewa defense? Is it the one that gave up 40 points a game or the one from the last quarter of the season? And also, they really need someone to separate themselves at the quarterback position. Losing quarterback Ryan Radcliffe will hurt this offense, but there are some tough non-conference road games as well. They have to travel to Michigan and North Carolina State. They're going to need a few breaks, but I can still see the Chippewas getting to 6 wins this season. Next up, I have the Toledo Rockets, and the reason for optimism, the Rockets have the talent, the depth offensively to be a fantastic offense, and no one in the MAC wants to tackle running back David Llewellyn, who's one of the best backs in the country. They also boast 2 outstanding options at wide receiver with Bernard Reedy and the 6'4 sophomore Alonzo Russell, who had an outstanding freshman year. Quarterback Terrence Russell is a dual threat type of a guy that continues to make strides throwing the football. When you look at center Zach Karen, he's an all-MAC performer, and he leads a veteran offensive line. Now, the cause for concern, defensively, they lose a lot in the front 7, and they're going to depend on a lot of newbies on that side of the football. Tough non-conference schedule at Florida, at Missouri, and they also have to play Navy, and they do have to travel within the conference to Ball State as well as Bowling Green. So they're going to have to depend on those cornerbacks, Cheatham Norrells as well as Chris Duke, to hold down the rest of the defense until the front 7 gets up to speed. But right now, I see them finishing 3rd, but I still think this is a very good football team, especially on the offensive side of football. They'll go bowling once again this year. The reason for optimism, this is still a dangerous offensive attack, and when you return a Heisman Trophy candidate at quarterback in Jordan Lynch, it's a big reason why, if you're a Husky fan, you're optimistic. Not only does Lynch return, but the entire starting offensive line does as well. Defensively, they played a lot of guys last season, so that should help with some of the losses, and there's a key piece at every level of their defense to help soften the blow as well. Now, cause for concern would be losing the big play wide receiver Martell Moore is a tough one because they have to find a reliable number 2, because Tommy Lee Lewis will step up and be a number 1 role. He'll do a great job, and although they played a lot of guys, they still must replace their 2 top pass rushers, and 5 out of the first 7 games of this year are on the road. So if they're going to get back to where they were last season, they're going to have to do it away from DeKalb, Illinois. Finally, winning the Western Division, I have the Ball State Cardinals, and the reason for optimism, this is a well-balanced offensive attack that can beat you on the ground or through the air. And when you look at quarterback Keith Winning, he should become Ball State's all-time leading passer this season. Running back Jawan Edwards went over 1,400 yards, 14 touchdowns at 6.1 yards a carry, and his backup Horatio Banks could also start for most teams in the MAC. You look at the receiving core, they have 3 all-MAC performers and wide receivers Willie Snead, Jamil Smith, and tight end Zane Fakes. Defensively, despite some of the numbers, I still think this is a very good defensive front with Jonathan Newsom and Nathan Ollie, and they're also solid on the corners with Jeffrey Garrett and Eric Patterson. And they have a pretty good conference schedule as well, only traveling to Northern Illinois in November. Now, the cause for concern, they have to replace 3 starters on that offensive line with youthful guys, and defensively, they're replacing all 3 linebackers. In all honesty, it could be a good thing because this is a Cardinals defense that struggled versus the run. 5.2 yards a carry given up and over 200 yards a game. That run defense can't have a relapse like it had this past season. But when I look at this team as a whole, I think they're solid from top to bottom. Defensive line will get better. The secondary is solid. I see Ball State winning the West Division.